Cheers, Paulie here. Whee! So, been doing a lot of role-playing games. I do want to show you some miniatures games. I came from miniatures, still a love of mine. I don't get out to clubs the way I used to, but I should. They're often not that transpositive. But let's have a look at... This is Beneath the Lily Banners, War of Three Kings. Now, miniatures have stabilised into periods. They did this long ago, back in the 60s. Ancients, obviously, ancient warfare, Egyptian chariots, Romans, often that extends through to medieval period. There tends to be a Renaissance sort of period, which they we call pike and musket period. You'll move up to sort of the horse and musket period, which tends to be 17th century, muskets, tricorns, sabres. And that often kind of ends with, well, American Civil War, but yes, it does go through to later wars, well, World War II, etc. So often we've played Napoleonics to death, and people look for different things. So War of the Spanish Succession, start of the 18th century, interesting set of wars. There's lots of rules for them. Beneath the Lily Banners actually looks at that whole late 17th century period, so sort of 1670s through to 1690s, or in fact it does go up into the early 1700s, but this is a transitional period. So we've gone from English Civil War, armoured pikemen, matchlock muskets, tri-bar helmets and Oliver Cromwell and these sorts of things, and we're getting into that Louis XIV hat and plume, Three Musketeers kind of period, and it's transitioning into horse and musket. And these are rules which are set for that wonderful transition period between Renaissance style warfare and later musket style. And it's that transition that makes these really interesting, because there's such a wealth of troop types. I'm absolutely delighted by this, because for one thing, it looks at a period that's been left entirely alone. Rules really haven't covered it, it's been left alone. And there's ranges of figures for this that are stunning. League of Augsburg does beautiful 1680s, 1690s figures. So do Front Rank Miniatures. They're beautiful and they paint up so well. You're often told in uniform books, oh, uniforms don't really come in, so those people didn't look. Yes, they did come in, and yes, they do look beautiful. What makes the transition thing interesting is it puts so much more variety of things on the table to play with. So infantry, they are moving from matchlock to flintlock. So some guys have basically the earlier mechanical system, some guys have the later. The flintlock is better. Bayonets and so on are just starting to come in. So some guys kind of have plug bayonets, which actually, some guys actually have socket bayonets. So there are some little equipment bits and pieces that vary between units and give them a little bit of variance. There are also things like pikes. Officially, infantry units still had pikes because they were there to fend off horsemen and so on. However, a lot of units were discarding the pikes and deciding, we'll just give those guys muskets, we'll put more fire out. Firepower is going to decide it. But there were different tactical choices being made. Dutch and British in particular decided to move to trying to maximise some of their firepower. They did, however, keep their pikes, but they're trying to look at different platoon fire systems and so on. French, who are a lot more aggressive, they decided they were going to try a far more melee-based system, so they want to rush in, fire a devastating volley and then crash into melee. So there's a lot of hand-to-hand in this sort of period. When you get into the Great Northern War, you get people like the Swedes who have this garpa, go for it style, where again they're looking at closing in and essentially firing a massive volley just before they hit, often charging in and firing at absolutely point blank range, and none of this sort of stand off and try and shoot the guy to pieces or things. And the cavalry are the same. Armour has gone out of fashion. They're looking for speed and ease on campaign, and the armour was just getting in the way, and with firearms just wasn't doing much. So there are some armoured units, There are a lot that don't have it. You also get, there's a split between whether Cavalry uses firepower tactics or some cold steel tactics. It's not quite as simple as the rules make out, I have to say. I'm actually a scholar of this. This is what my degree was in. But in essence, do you rely on firing pistols and carbines from horseback, or are you trying to close in with a sword as quickly as possible? There are actually pros and cons to all of these systems. None of our ancestors were idiots. Everything they did, particularly on battlefields where your lives on the line, were done for a reason. However, units kind of decided this for themselves. There often weren't kind of national drill books and so on. It was this wonderful flexi period. So you can get these kind of interesting armies where you've got all sorts of different systems used by different units. The artillery is quite slow. And what these rules have done is they've kind of tried to bring some of that chaos into the actual game. So it's a nice gaming system. What they've done is they have used different dice types to represent the different training and skill levels of units. So 6-sided dice, 8-sided dice, 10, 12. That's what you're going to roll when you're trying to, say, hit with fire from your muskets and so on, and you're looking for a set task number. You're looking for 6s and higher and so on. So what you're trying to do, you might be rolling the same number of dice due to the size of the unit, but you'll be rolling smaller dice for the less experienced unit. It stops you having to look through all these different charts and tables, which are kind of traditional with these games. You get a plus for this and a minus for that. They're walking the dice type back and forth to at least trim down the amount of administration you're going to have to do to keep the game flowing. So that's nice. It's there are a few surprises in the actual technical structure of the game. He's the designer, Barry Hilton, a lovely guy. You'll find him on Facebook and online, and in the 17th century warfare pages and so on Facebook. But you've got units, they have morale, you've got to check for morale when you take casualties, and the usual things. Damaged units is actually kind of listed as in figures. You'll have to put some actual damage counters or little miniatures that you've sort of painted in casualty positions. You put them behind to track the damage that's been done to units. There's a nice kind of randomization system for battlefield events and so on. I was iffy about it at first. I did a few run-throughs. Yes, it does bring some fun into it because this is a period where the artillery is a bit uncertain. Literally, they lost generals by standing next to guns that exploded and all kinds of mishaps. So they've got some random mishap kind of things that can come randomly into the play. Don't have to play them, but it does add a bit of uncertainty into the whole thing. It's designed for 28mm miniatures. You can play it with any scale. This would look great in 6mm, but again, those 28mm Augsburg and Frontline miniatures are just stunning. But the book itself is actually set up for the campaign in Ireland. So it's Jacobites versus William of Orange's faction. So William of Orange, obviously English, but also you've got Dutch troops and Danish mercenaries and so on, and the Jacobites have got some French guys that came over to them and lots of colourful kind of Jacobite units, and they are a bit poor on technology, so they tend to have way more pike to muskets and these sorts of things. So so that's a nice look. I haven't really seen that little war emphasised anywhere, but of course you can play the grand scale 9 Years' War, War of the League of Augsburg and so on. So I think it's a terrific period that's been left untapped, and these rules do a great job. You also have beneath the lily banners with Talon and Claw. This is done for the Great Northern War and the Eastern Wars that took place at that time. So this does actually go sort of up to the sort of 1720s if you're doing sort of some of the Russia versus Sweden stuff. But this has not only sort of the big Swedish versus Russian and Danish versus Swedish wars that were going on, but also brings in things like the Turks and who have very different fighting styles themselves. They've got a lot more muskets. They've got no pikes. They are very kind of skirmish and sort of sniper oriented. They've got swarms of cavalry. They still use bows, these sorts of things. So this brings in all these kind of rules. So it's actually a bit of an astonishing period when you think of it. There are these very, very medieval or Renaissance Eastern armies, often still wearing mail, and often still using tribes and nomad horse archers and so on to back them up. And you've got, you know, honest to God guys in lace cuffs and feathers in their hats and muskets facing them down. Really colourful period, and again, not done often enough. Polish lancers, all these sorts of things all come into this. So it just absolutely overflows with colour. There is a set of scenarios which have been done. Taste of Victory, which give you some pre-done little battlefield setups to play, so that's good. You can just sit down and do it. There are rules in the actual main rulebook for randomly setting up your own battles together. I like the fact that it's not competition minded at all. Competition mindedness completely destroyed a lot of the fellowship in miniatures gaming. People started to have to get really clever about setting up battlefields here. That, you know, it wasn't a thing you kind of shared and enjoyed. It was something you were in to win. This I would describe as old school rules. That's not designed for that competitiveness. It's designed as a shared experience that you're going to really enjoy with the person you're playing with, even to the extent where you might want to have an umpire in because he set up some scenarios for you. So you traditional battlefield sort of things, we actually set up the thing, the whole layout, and you know, you decide who's coming on what side. It's not sort of quite as aggressively set up with, you know, points and so on that you're spending to try and like trick the other guy into bad terrain. And it does have systems for, you know, designing your armies and so on. There's points values for things, so there is a balance. So it brings in the best of old game systems and blends it with a lot of the neatness of the new. The dice mechanics are good, its morale rules are good, and the colour of it is just amazing. It's a wonderful spectacle, and on that basis I would really highly recommend that this is a period that you should go out and take a look at. And if you like the period, and you'll find a lot of books from Helion Press and so on all about it, really suggest you take a look at this guy's rules. They're beautiful. You'll get them at League of Augsburg online, and yeah, absolutely highly recommended. I think it's a wonderful job. It's I think it's dragging me back into miniatures. So yeah, check them out. Cheers.